Okay, friends, good evening, everyone. Welcome back to our fall evangelism program entitled, Who Can You Trust? I hope you enjoyed that beautiful day out there today, because you know what's coming, right? It's coming, so enjoy that beautiful weather, but it was a great day in Canada's capital. And I know you enjoyed the meeting last night, right? It was a good meeting. You know, it was so good. I was so pumped up, I could not sleep last night. I watched football till 2 a.m., got up at 5, said to my wife, I said, honey, how did you sleep? She goes, I didn't sleep either. So, you know, that's a good sign that the messages are powerful. So thank you very much, Pastor James. And, you know, when I saw tonight's subject, can we trust organized religion? I go, oh, here we go again. I'm not sleeping tonight. You know, it's going to be a powerful message, folks. So please buckle up for this one. Now, I did a little research today, and how many of you know here that the Bible is the best-selling book of all time? You know that? It is the best-selling book of all time. But did you know that every year there are 80 to 100 million Bibles that are printed globally? Okay? Now, I couldn't find any stats for Canada, but in the U.S. alone, 20 million Bibles are sold every year. You know what that means? 55,000 Bibles are sold every single day in the United States. Isn't that amazing? That is an amazing stat. You want to hear something else? With the instability around the world, 2024, last year, was a record year for Bible sales. Now, you may wonder who is responsible for that. And like the pastor said, we're not going to mention his name. You know who I'm talking about? You know who I'm talking about that caused the instability around the world? I'm not mentioning his name, right? So, if 2024 was a record, what do you think? How many Bibles do you think are going to be sold in 2025? That's going to be another record, right? But you know, God uses the Bible to transform people, amen? It gives us hope because we live in a very dark world. But the Bible says that the Word of God is a lamp unto our feet and a light unto our path. So we don't have to walk in the darkness any longer. And if you don't have a Bible, friends, they are free out in the common room there. You'll see them on a table with some other magazines like Bible studies, health magazines, and there's also some other inspirational books. So, I've got a very short health nugget for you tonight. How many here drink lemon water? That's a lot more hands than cacao. I didn't get any hands last night. Well, I think I got 2, right? But lemon water, okay, so you drink lemon water, which is great. But did you know that when you combine that with olive oil and you drink that on an empty stomach, first thing in the morning, it does amazing things for your bodies. When you combine them together, it is going to be loaded with vitamin C. It is a powerhouse of antioxidants. It helps digestion and constipation. It is a great detoxifying agent for your liver, and it is great, and it also aids in weight loss, which is a great thing, right? It reduces inflammation, and both the olive oil and the lemons are also linked to be fighters of cancer. So that's another superfood, right? Isn't that a fantastic drink? Okay, so you're going to drink it first thing in the morning. I do this every morning, okay? So here, when you make it, I usually just squeeze like a half a lemon into a glass, and I take a tablespoon of olive oil and put it in there, okay? And then I just put some warm water in there. But don't drink it just straight through your mouth like so. You want to use a straw because, you know, the lemons are very acidic, right? It's very hard on your tooth enamel, right? And then after you've done it, you can kind of just rinse your mouth out, and then you won't have any effects. But there's another little health nugget for you. And tonight's subject is, can we trust organized religion? And as we listen to Pastor James preach the word here tonight, I want you to ask a question to yourself. If there's only one Bible, how come we have so many different denominations? You just think about that for a moment, right? One Bible, and there are thousands of different denominations, okay? And with that, we welcome you. We're excited that you are here for our second night, and we're going to start early, and we're going to ask Pastor James to come up and give us the message that the Lord has placed upon his heart.
How's everybody doing this beautiful summer day? I went for a bike ride today. I brought my bike with me from home, and I like discovering some trails around and multi-ways and different paths to enjoy nature. And when I got back to the hotel today, I have to admit I was sweating more than I had planned on. But it was such a beautiful day, and I was grateful. And it's good to be with you again tonight. I appreciate the health nuggets as well. Olive oil, you know, I have never mixed olive oil with water. Usually I mix olive oil with my pasta. But I'm going to try it with a little bit of water to see, because I do like the lemon. And yeah, that sounds good. So thank you so much for sharing, Brother Reed. And thank you for the word about cacao yesterday as well. So I'm still thinking about that, looking on Amazon for a good resource for that. So friends, tonight we are going to have part 2 of our 6-part examination that explores some big questions about Christianity. For the first few nights, I'm using some grand themes. So we're going to take kind of a top-down approach. We're going to look at the big picture. So last night, what part of the big picture was the Bible? Can you trust the Bible? That's a fairly grand question that you can ask any number of people, regardless of their denomination. And tonight, same thing, whether you're a churched person or not, this is another one of those big questions. And this is what I like to do before we're going to narrow the focus down a little later in the week and talk about some very specific biblical principles and ideas that are there with the time that we have together. We're going to look at 1 or 2. But for tonight, and then again tomorrow night as well, we're going to look at some big things. So last night, tonight, and tomorrow night, we're going to look at some big questions. And tonight's is religion. And the reason why I've chosen to share this with you as I pray for guidance into what order we should do things is because I have encountered a lot of people in my own family and just in my social circles, sometimes with work as well, depending on my workplace and where I found myself, who are anti-religion. In fact, I've met a lot of people who believe in God or say they might even be agnostic, where they say, I don't know if there's a higher power. I'm not really concerned if there is or not. There might be. So they're not militant atheists. But man, when you talk about religion, people can get fairly militant. No, I don't want anything to do with religion. I don't like organized religion. I usually ask them, well, then do you like disorganized religion? Some of them see the humor in that, some don't. But religion as a whole, the idea of religion, there are some false ideas about religion, some myths about religion, and there's several prominent myths that have been basically have proliferated with the days of social media. You heard me talk yesterday about the gospel according to YouTube and the power of the internet, which is a wonderful thing, right? The internet, those of us who are Gen Xers and you baby boomers, we grew up without the internet, right? We remember life without a screen. The only screen was the television inside the living room that you had to walk across to change the channel, right? I was the remote control for my dad, right? There was no remote control. I walked across and changed it to channel 3 or whatever he wanted to see the hockey game, right? So we remember life without the internet. And so we've lived on both sides of that divide, and we've seen how urban legends can now proliferate and grow with tremendous speed and power around the world. So good information can grow and go, but so can bad information. So the internet, and I mean, I tease it sometimes and I poke fun at social media, but really it's not inherently good or evil, is it? It's just a medium. It's just a method for sharing information, just like a television. A television isn't good or bad, it's amoral. which means it's without morals or ethics, right? It's not good or bad. It can be used for good. It can also contain a lot of garbage on it, right? When I was a kid, they called the television the idiot box. That's what people would call it if there were stupid television shows. Of course, we've progressed past that. Now we have idiot screens in our pockets, right, where we can access all sorts of foolishness. And that has resulted in a lot of misinformation and disinformation that's spread around the world. And there's a lot. I remember the early days of urban legends on the internet. I remember a story that came up in the 1990s. It was actually funny looking back on it. Let me tell you the story very quickly. Maybe you guys have heard it. There was a businessman, and he went down to New Orleans on a business trip. He flew into New Orleans on a business trip. He checked into the hotel, and like a lot of businessmen do after they check into the hotel and they get settled, he didn't have meetings till the following day, so he went downstairs to the lounge in the hotel, and he sat at the bar to have a drink. And as he sat at the bar to have a drink, another stranger sat a couple of stools down and just said, "Hey, you in town on business?" And the guy said, "Yeah, I am. Who do you work with?" And they started just comparing notes about different corporations that they worked for and why they were in town in New Orleans for meetings. And the guy said, "Hey, let me buy you one more drink before you head back up." "All right, okay, one more drink." And he bought him one more drink. He went to the bar, got a drink, and sat down. And the next thing the guy remembers, he woke up the next morning and he was in a bathtub filled with ice water. And there was a phone beside, like the hotel phone, it had been placed beside the bathtub, and it said, "Don't move." There was a note beside the phone that said, "Don't move, call 911. And he thought, "What's going on? How did I get in this bathtub full of ice water and I'm freezing cold? And he picked up the phone and he dialed 911 and 911 operator, and he said, "Hey, I need help. I'm in a bathtub full of ice water and I don't know how I got here. I'm here in New Orleans." And she said, "Sir, don't move. Reach around with your free arm behind you and feel your back." He said, "What, in the water?" She said, "Yes, reach down into the water." And he reached down into the water, and she said, "Can you feel any tubes protruding from your back?" He said, "I actually do. There's tubes coming out of my back." And she said, "Sir, don't move. Your kidneys have been illegally harvested. And you have now been placed in that ice water. We have to come and get you because you have no kidneys." This story spread, some of you are gasping like it's true. This never happened, people, okay? This story spread in such a profound manner in the mid-1990s, in the early days of the internet, that the New Orleans Police Department had to issue a public statement, an old school bulletin, you can find it online, that basically said there is no illegal kidney harvesting happening in New Orleans because it started to negatively impact tourism. People were believing it because the internet was brand new. It was the Wild West back then. People, remember, there was a lot of craziness. There still is, but back then everybody believed it because if it's online, it has to be true. Nowadays, if somebody makes a YouTube, well, it had to be true, right? But back then it was, wow, imagine this story. People would spread it. This was before social media. It was spread via email. And you would get this email, "Warning, do not travel to New Orleans." And people were like, "Oh, snap, I got to cancel my flight." So this is the power of myths, right? A negative thing and a false piece of information that's shared, and it results in fear. And then people change their actions and their attitudes. So I want to begin with a question tonight. Do you think that inaccurate things have been shared about religion? Myths, legends? As we prepare to explore this together tonight, let's take a snapshot of religion in Canada. Here's a snapshot. Oh yeah, we're going to go through. Okay. Thank you so much. There we go. Is my clicker working okay? Thank you, Daniel. Can we trust organized religion? Let's look at a snapshot. Am I going the right way? Now, if I press it, okay, is it going backwards, Daniel? What's going on here, man? Oh, there we go. Okay, I just have to press the right button. Technology, eh? It works wonderful when it's working. Okay, here's religion in Canada as of 2021, the latest census data that we have. Just over half of Canadians consider themselves Christian, right? They declare themselves Christian. Now, bear in mind, that doesn't mean that half of Canada is going to church every Saturday or Sunday or Friday or wherever, right? This does not mean that. What this means is when folks look at a census, at this long-form census, and they're going to tick a box, they're like, yeah, I was christened as a baby, I'm a Christian, and they tick the box, right? Or yeah, my parents go to church on Sunday, and I'm there a couple times a year, like Easter and Christmas. Sure, I'm Christian, I believe in God, and they tick the box. So this doesn't mean that half of Canada is in church every weekend, right? But what it does mean is that half of them consider themselves adherents to Christianity, 53.3%. It's down from 83% in 1991. In 2001, it was 77%. In 2011, it was 67%. Do you see a pattern there? I'm fairly certain, I can't look into the future, but the next census, it's going to be less than half. It'll be less than half for the first time in Canada's history. And of course, the largest group is Catholic. The largest group of Christians is Catholic, right? Catholics are part of our Christian brotherhood. There are three main Western religions, Christianity, Judaism, and Islam. Those are the three main Western religions. And in Christianity, just like in Islam, it branches off to some different beliefs like Sunni and Shia, etc. In Christianity, we have some main branches as well. Catholics and Protestants being the two main branches. And then from Protestantism, as Brother Reed pointed out, as Reed said, there are hundreds and hundreds of denominations. Some large, some worldwide, some that are very localized within North America, Europe, Africa, other areas, okay? So, but here in Canada, the largest group of Christians is Catholic. All right, the largest Protestant group is the United Church of Canada. United Church of Canada has... Now, here we're going to clarify something as well. 1,200,000 adherents. That means, again, on the census, they would identify themselves as United Church of Canada. It doesn't mean that they are in church every Sunday. They are not. The United Church of Canada is the fastest shrinking denomination in Canada. Sadly, many of their beautiful historic churches are closing. They are being sold. Seventh-day Adventists have bought some. Other denominations and community centers, etc., have bought them because the United Church in Canada, sadly, is facing a very sharp downward trajectory in their membership graph. So in 2023, there are 325,000 members on the books for the United Church of Canada, and that's down from 1.1 million members on the books. So not just adherents. In the mid-60s, in 1964, the United Church in Canada reached its zenith. Its highest point of membership on the books was over 1 million in 1964. Now, Christianity has a long history in Canada as well, and it goes back to a gentleman named Giovanni Caboto, or as we call him, John Cabot. Sounds a little better in Italian, doesn't it? Yes, Giovanni arrived in Newfoundland in 1497, and he planted the papal flag. Of course, he was an Italian explorer, so he planted the papal flag, and he claimed the territory for the Catholic Church. So in the late 15th century, this began the Christian footprint within what would eventually become Canada. And he planted the flag for the Pope and King Henry VII. So it seemed like it was a bit of a joint venture. And then, of course, in 1608, we had Samuel de Champlain. He established a Catholic colony in Quebec City. So as they moved inland in Lower Canada, here we have the permanent Catholic roots beginning in Quebec, going back to 1608. And now today, we still have over 20 million people who identify as Christian in Canada, right? A little over half, 53.3%. Yet even among this group, besides the nuns, right? The nuns, as we call them in census language, the ones who click no religious affiliation, that's the nuns. But even besides that, there are those who they claim no religious affiliation. Even amongst the nuns and others, there is a growing mistrust and distrust of religion. In fact, many people today, especially long-time Canadians, are choosing to leave their religious affiliation and their organization altogether. There are many causes why people would do this. Here we can review a few of them. One of the predominant causes research shows is that people leave a childhood church because they disagree with what the church teaches. Not always, but this is one of the more predominant reasons. So they don't like the fact that the church teaches miracles, angels, Jesus saving people from sin. An interesting note about the United Church of Canada is that they have turned away from a lot of these teachings about miracles, etc., and yet their membership is still dropping. So there's a connection in some circles, but in other areas, churches that have tried to remove a lot of this are not faring any better. There are many other causes, and I've listed a whole bunch right here. They disagree with the teachings, perhaps sexual scandal, especially among leadership or folks that they look up to. A traumatic event. They might have been mistreated or abused by someone in a position of authority within the church. They might feel the church is too focused on politics. Some churches have turned into predominantly left-wing or right-wing political mouthpieces in Canada and the United States, much to their detriment. A church should be, in my view, apolitical. Without politics, right? Respecting free human will and the fact that not everybody that votes contrary to how you feel is an idiot, right? We separate ourselves from that type of toxic language, loving one another. I mean, that's what Jesus told us to do anyhow. Sometimes people are, especially the younger generation, they don't appreciate how the church, whatever their denomination happens to have been, no denominations have totally clean hands in this regard, treatment of minorities, or the LGBTQ population. So there are some folks that just say, I can't take it. I can't handle all the racism that happened in the past or in the present, or I can't take how they treat folks who have different sexuality than they do. So there are a number of reasons why people leave church. So religion has people who love it, they have people who hate it, and they have some very outspoken critics as well, some people who despise it and loathe religion. And of course, one of the most predominant haters of the last 50 years would be this gentleman who has since passed away, sadly, Christopher Hitchens. Have you heard of him? He wrote a well-known book called God. Note, it is a small g on the title because this man despised everything religious. God is not great. How religion poisons everything. His book was so toxic and so acidic that there were even some of his contemporaries, fellow atheists, who basically said, Christopher, you kind of went over the top a little bit. Like you went a little overboard because religion has not poisoned everything. They've actually done a lot of good. And religion has not been responsible for more deaths in the world's history than godless people. It has in fact historically been godless movements such as communism, China's Great Leap Forward, Stalin's movement in Russia that have caused far more deaths throughout human history than religion. So they had to kind of tell Christopher he needs to settle down a bit, but he was having none of it. He hated religion, and he made it very clear. He hated all religion. He was a class 1 hater. In fact, I have a direct quote from him in 2007. This was from a speech that he gave, and he claimed that religion is this, and I quote, "Religion is derived from the childhood of our species, the bawling, fearful period of infancy. It comes from the time when we did not know that we lived on an orb, we thought we lived on a disc." End quote. In other words, he was saying, we're smarter now. We are more knowledgeable. We don't need religion any longer. And of course, along with Hitchens, we know there are a growing number of people who don't trust religion for one reason or another. Even if some of them are willing to consider the slight possibility that there's a greater being out there. There are many, many people that feel quietly they don't want to be made fun of publicly or with their circle of friends on social media or in person, but there are lots of people who will admit quietly, one-on-one or in a small group, that there's a distinct possibility that there is a great force out there because of the incredible evidence of design in the universe as well as even in the human body and in our natural world. So there are lots of people that just can't get over, even if they have the slightest inkling of how incredibly complex we are as humans, or even a plant is, they just can't get over the fact that this is evidence of design. But many of those people will publicly say, I want nothing to do with religion. So what I want to do tonight is challenge you just a little bit. And as we did last night, we're going to look at it from a slightly different angle. Last night, I challenged you to consider the possibility that the Bible is trustworthy because it paints a realistic picture of life. And tonight, I'm going to show you from the Bible that religion, true religion, is actually a beautiful thing. So let's do it. It's found in James chapter 1. And it's a simple formula that removes the complication from religion. Now remember, I've said many times, and I'm going to say it again tonight, I like to keep things simple, right? If we share something from the front, I want to be able to share something that even a child could understand. And so we're going to cover complicated things, but we're going to do our best to do it in a way that's simple. So here it is. This is James, which is one of my favorite books by coincidence. The guy had a great name, but he also wrote a great book. And James, just a short little book, right? It's 5 chapters, but it's power-packed. He's fairly blunt. Maybe that's why I identify with him, because he's pretty blunt, and yet you could tell that he loved the Lord. And so in James chapter 1, he gives a very beautiful definition for religion, and he says this: pure and undefiled religion before God and the Father is this: to visit orphans and widows in their trouble and to keep oneself unspotted from the world. There you have it. That's the definition of religion. If you're going to, like me, and I invite you to consider the possibility that this is a wise path, allow the Bible to give you the big definitions of life. Right? There's lots of minor details in the Bible, but there are some grand themes as well. And this is one of them. The Bible actually defines what religion is. And by doing so, it helps us discover what religion isn't, what it is not. Pure and undefiled religion before God and the Father is this: pure and undefiled. In other words, unadulterated religion. Right? I make maple syrup every spring. I'm an amateur maple syrup producer, and I think that resonates up in this area because Lanark County, which isn't far from here, is the maple syrup capital of Ontario. And then, of course, we're just across the river from the maple syrup capital of the world, where 70% of the maple syrup worldwide is made in that beautiful La Belle Province, right, in Quebec. Now, when I make maple syrup, I learned years ago, because I've been doing it for many years, and my uncle, who lived in this area, grew up in Ashton, and now he lives way up north of Sault Ste. Marie. He's done it for years. Like when I was a kid, we learned that when you make maple syrup and you hot pack it, so you're packing it hot, and I get the lid on there with the little foam seal that comes with the food grade glue that seals it with the heat, just like when you buy it in Costco or anything for that matter. I get the lid on and I lay it on its side, because the heat is going to kill the adulterants, right? I need any microorganisms that are in there that could cause spoilage to be killed by the heat of the syrup. Just like when I can tomatoes every year, right? I'm going to put it in the hot water bath, and I'm going to boil it for the prescribed amount of time, depending on what's inside that jar, so that I kill adulterants. Why? Because adulterants cause spoilage. Once in a while, a little jar of tomatoes gets through with some adulterants. I don't know how. There must be a leak or some compromise in the seal, and I can tell because a week or two later in the canning room, I'll go downstairs and I say, something smells in here. Doesn't smell good either. And there's no rotten vegetables around, and I look, and one of the jars is all cloudy and bubbled, and the seal, instead of being down like that, like a good seal, is up because of the pressure. And I realize that can of tomatoes, that jar of tomatoes can't be eaten, right? That one's done. It's probably full of botulism and all sorts of nastiness, and I take it and I throw it down the toilet, and I flush the toilet, and I clean the jar. But why? Because there was an adulterant in there. There was something that caused spoilage. God doesn't like adulterants in religion. And so James, under guidance of the Holy Spirit, gives us the beautiful recipe for unadulterated. There's no contaminants here. It's pure and undefiled. So what we're going to do is break it down, because there's two components here. Visiting orphans and widows in their trouble, that's component one, and keeping oneself unspotted from the world. What does this mean? So what we have to recognize tonight is that the Bible is full of prescriptions. What do I mean by that? A prescription is a piece of instruction, something to do. The 10 Commandments are an example, right? All the 10 Commandments, right? Don't take the name of the Lord your God in vain. Remember the Sabbath day, the 4th commandment. Honor your father and your mother. Don't have any other gods before me, like the 1st commandment. Those are 10 prescriptions. They're pieces of instruction that are very specific. And James's instructions here are very specific as well. But behind every prescription in the Bible, without exception, there is a principle. So there's a principle behind every prescription. Anytime you're reading the Bible, if you come across a piece of instruction, you shall not kill, behind that prescription, there's a principle, the sanctity of life. That's the principle. Thou shalt not, I like using the old King James language sometimes, even though we don't talk that way anymore. Thou shalt not commit adultery. Right? What's the principle behind that? The sacredness of marriage. Marriage that God created in the Garden of Eden before sin was even in the world. Right? So behind every piece of information or direction that we have, behind every prescription, there is a principle. And so it is with this. We have 2 very clear prescriptions, and behind these pieces of instruction, there's no exception, there are principles. So, what's the first one? Well, visiting orphans and widows, what? Point me to the orphanage. Is that the principle? Probably not, right? Are orphanages still a thing? I don't know. In this part of the world, they're not, thankfully. Point me to the orphanage? No. Visiting orphans and widows. We need to explore this for a minute in the context of where James was writing. Okay? Visiting orphans and widows. In James's day, in 1st century, there was no social safety net for widows. Women, sadly, were considered pretty much equal to a piece of property, right? That's just history. It's not a happy part of our history, but it's how it was. Women, if they didn't have a man taking care of them, were in trouble. So if a woman was not wealthy, if she didn't come from a wealthy line and have really wealthy parents to look after her, and she married a man who was providing stability, women were generally uneducated and illiterate, so a widow would have relied on the generosity of others in order to help her even feed her children. That's why we see in the early Christian church, they came up with this office of deacons, right? Which deacon just means helper, right? That's what the old Greek word means, diakonia, you're a helper. So they came up with this idea, we need people to man the tables, to look after the distribution for the poor, to help make it organized, because orphans and widows would be in serious trouble of starving, and sometimes women would have to do unscrupulous things to try to make ends meet. So James is saying, look, one of the most important things you can do is make sure that you are taking care of the vulnerable people in society. Visiting orphans and widows, it's very simple. Help others, meet people's needs. That's the first great principle behind pure religion. Helping other people. Some folks summarize it in one word: service. Service. See, religion is not service alone, because there are many non-religious community service organizations that exist that do a lot of good in our community. And it's wonderful for us to even be a part of them and to associate with them, because there are people who, just because God is actually speaking to their heart, they might not even give God credit for it, but they're using and volunteering their time to actually do good for society. But that's not religion. That's community service, but it's one part. That is the principle behind visiting orphans and widows. Help other people meet their needs. This is the first great reality of true religion. And it accomplishes a whole lot more than just creating social justice. As I said, James's counsel was particularly poignant in the 1st century because there's no social safety net for these poor people. But as we look around, we see rampant need today, don't we? We see a growing disparity between the rich and the poor. We see a shrinking middle class. We see increased food insecurity. We see a whole lot more homelessness and encampments than we did years ago, right? Than in the 2010s even. So we see these needs growing. It's not like it's going away. That's why Jesus said, the poor you will always have among you. Jesus said that to his disciples. He wasn't saying, hey, give up, you're always going to have poor people. He was basically saying there's always going to be an inequitable distribution of wealth in the world. There will always be some form of injustice that creates poor people. Now, Paul alluded to it and said, look, there's some people who are poor just because they're lazy. Like Paul was very blunt about it. And he said if somebody isn't willing to work and they're able, they shouldn't eat. Right? Paul was pretty practical, and that's the other side of it, sure. But there's lots of people who are the working poor, right, who are struggling, realistically struggling, and depending on the goodness of others to feed their family here in Canada, in prosperous Canada, and our southern neighbor, even to a greater degree. So this advice, this 2,000-year-old definition of religion is just as relevant today. In fact, I would argue more so. And that's one of the most beautiful things about the Bible. Ancient book, still relevant. So its description and definition of religion is actually amazing because we can take these 2,000-year-old words from this bold guy and say, wow, that still works today when I want to define religion in my own life. And you know the other beautiful thing? When we do act this out, when we decide, okay, this is going to be religion for me, I'm going to start with this. Remember, we haven't hit part B yet, but I'm going to start with this. I want to do good for others. This is going to be part of my religion, and a big part, because it's half of it. It actually helps us mentally and emotionally as well. See, God knew what he was doing when he told us to help others. Because when it takes the focus off ourselves, we become in a healthier mental place. You know, that's why it's a dangerous thing to be offended. It's okay if you're offended about something, but you got to move on. Because when you're offended, your focus is on yourself. It's not a mentally healthy place to remain. Be there if you need to be there, if someone's offended you, and then move on. That's the beautiful thing about helping others. It takes the focus off self, places it on the needs of those around us, and actually makes us nicer people to be around. Isn't that awesome? So religion, we can demonstrate, actually makes people nicer to be around. Therefore, if we meet someone who says they're religious, but they're difficult to be around, they probably haven't encountered this definition. They haven't embraced biblical religion yet. Doesn't mean they can't. There's hope for everyone, but they don't know it, and we need to point them to James chapter 1. Helping others, of course, can take many forms: community service, sharing God's love and word and action, joining even one of the community service organizations that's doing it well in our community. Sometimes we don't need to reinvent the wheel and start our own organization from scratch. We can just jump in and volunteer with someone else and get to know some other people outside of our bubble. Now, there's a second part as well, though. James said, stay unspotted from the world. What does that mean? Don't mingle with sinners? You know, I've met some folks who take it that way. That's what I call the Pharisee way. The Pharisees got mad at Jesus. You can read about it in Matthew, Mark, Luke, especially those three Gospels. Touch on it in John a little bit. They got mad because they said, he's eating and drinking with sinners. And they were disgusted at that. And so I know some folks, I've met them, and they've told me. And in fact, I remember sitting down and visiting with one lady. She was 77 years old, so she was still healthy, living in her home. She wasn't elderly by any stretch. She was still active, so she was still living her life, but she was in her senior years. And she admitted to me, she said, Pastor, I was raised in such a fashion that I was told I should not ever associate with people who don't believe the way I do, because by beholding we become changed, she said. And so I was told not to associate with anyone who was outside of my denomination. And she said to me, thankfully, she said, I realized some years ago that was wrong. And I thought, oh, thank goodness, because I don't want to have to try and change the mind of a 77-year-old. Especially, like, that was 20 years ago, so I was 20 years younger than I am now, and this lady was in her 70s. I'm like, I don't want to argue with her, right, out of respect. But thank God, she had already realized that wasn't right. That's not what James is saying when he says, keep yourself unspotted from the world. Once again, we have that specific piece of instruction. Stay unspotted from the world. What was he saying here? Very simple. God doesn't want us to withdraw like a monk. Right? There are some folks who decided this was the best way for them to live a holy life. This one's St. Anthony of Egypt. This dude lived in isolation in an old abandoned Roman fort in the 4th century for decades. By himself. They would throw food to him over the wall. He wouldn't talk to anyone. People were so inspired by this in the 4th century that he ended up with an unintentional colony of people living in caves and little huts around the fort, and they would call out to him and say, please come out and teach us how to live a holy life. After about 35 years, they convinced him to leave the fort, and he joined them and shared how to live a holy life and overcome temptation or whatever. But for over 30 years, he stayed inside this fort and wouldn't talk to anyone, and they'd just throw him food over the wall. Now, he wanted to keep himself unspotted from the world. That's an extreme example. But friends, I've met Christians who almost fit this definition of living inside the fort. Let's just throw them some food. They don't want to associate with anyone for fear they get contaminated. Now, behind the instruction is a clear principle, friends. Overcome sin and selfishness. Do not align your values with those of the world when the world's values disagree with God's. It's that simple. Keeping yourself unspotted from the world recognizes that one of the amazing things about Christianity, and I invite people to consider Christianity whenever they're willing to have a conversation with me if they're not, and I tell them, listen, I'm not going to sugarcoat it for you. I want to paint a realistic picture of Christianity, just like the Bible paints a realistic picture of life, as we discovered last night. If you choose to be a Christian, you're recognizing that you are joining a movement that will be counter-cultural as long as life on earth lasts. The values of Christianity should never and will never align with the values of the world. They just don't. So I got good news for you. If you're Christian tonight, we're a square peg and we don't fit into the round hole. And that's okay. We don't try to fit in. We don't want to fit in. But here's the awesome thing. Now, Jesus was the embodiment of true religion, service, and overcoming sin, because that's why he came to this earth, became wrapped in this cloak of humanity to die for our sins. That's part of the plan of salvation. That's one of the beliefs that unites all Christians, Catholic, Protestant, no matter what the denomination is. There's a general belief that Jesus came to this world to die for our sins. Praise God. He came down, though, and he showed us how to live true religion. Jesus had 2 basic rules of socialization. Number 1, Jesus would talk to anybody. Anybody. There's a great old preacher that I used to listen to named C.D. Brooks, and he used to say, Jesus kept bad company. And he did. He'd hang out with anyone. Tax collectors, so people who had betrayed their own people to work for the occupying force, the Romans, for personal gain. Losers. Prostitutes. Jesus would sit down and eat with these people and make them feel valuable. Jesus would talk to anyone. That was rule number 1. Rule number 2, equally important. Jesus never lowered his standards to make someone else more comfortable. Never. He never changed his standards or values so that he could fit in with a group of people. He made sure in every interaction with someone who didn't believe the same way he did that he was the agent of change, and those people walked away impacted by their interaction with him. That was his second great rule, and that is the embodiment of true religion. Jesus understood service, but he knew being unspotted from the world didn't mean withdrawing from society and hiding behind a wall. It meant getting out there and being with the people, showing them that you love them, mingling with them as one who desires their good and gaining their confidence. And then saying, hey, why don't you follow me? That's true religion. Jesus embodied it. In fact, he talked about it as well. And we're going to get to that in just a couple of minutes. In Matthew chapter 22, a guy came to him and said, "Hey, Jesus, what is the great commandment of the law?" Sometimes people would try to trap him. The Pharisees did a number of times. They wanted to trap Jesus and try to entrap him in his own words. They didn't realize that they were talking with the creator of the universe. He was a little bit out of their league when it came to intellect, but they didn't realize that. They just thought he was just some dude, some carpenter's son from a backwater town called Nazareth, and nothing good comes out of Nazareth. They didn't realize they were outmatched, right? But there were other people who just came to Jesus with an honest question. And sometimes they knew he was a rabbi, he had a following, and there was a tradition back then. There was lots of rabbis that would rise up and have following and have disciples. Jesus wasn't the only one. He was just the only one that could die for our sins. But here he was walking, and the guy says, "Teacher, what's the great commandment of the law?" And Jesus said this to him, some well-known words. He says in Matthew chapter 22, "You will love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the first and great commandment. And the second is like it," he says. "You shall love your neighbor as yourself." And then he made a very startling declaration. "On these two commandments hang all the law and all the prophets." So every single piece of law in the Bible, every single piece of instruction, and every commandment given in the Bible can be summarized with love for God and love for others. Isn't that beautifully simple? See, even a child can understand that, right? Love God, love other people. For me, it starts with love for God. I think that's the best way, because the more I love God, the more I can look at other people with love and not annoyance, right? It just works that way. The more you love God, the more it's possible to love people. That's Jesus summarizing exactly what James said in James chapter 1. "Pure and undefiled religion before God and the Father is this, to visit orphans and widows in their trouble." So James just put it in the opposite order. He said, first, you love and help others. Keep yourself unspotted from the world. Overcome sin. The best way to do that is to be connected to Jesus. So that's true religion. Love for God, love for others. Live for others, as James put it, and overcome sin. That's the best definition of religion I could come to you with, because it's in the Word of God. Jesus said it, and then about a decade or two later, James said it. Live for others, overcome sin. If you embrace this formula, then you are basically embracing religion as a true thing of beauty. So the next time you hear someone express their distaste for religion, share this definition with them and say, I respectfully, if they're willing to have a conversation, don't argue with people on Facebook. That's a waste of time. But if somebody's willing to have a conversation with you, either online or in person, if they display that willingness, just tell them respectfully, I think you've probably been given the wrong definition of religion if you say you hate religion or you can't stand religious people. Because I actually discovered how the Bible defines religion in a way that I think even people who don't go to church could appreciate the fact that this would make the world a nicer place. It actually helps communities be more pleasant to live in. And when you share this in word and in action, right? Since actions speak just a little bit louder than the words. When we share this in word and in action, my goodness, folks will then realize religion can be a thing of beauty. Now, Reed mentioned it, and I'm glad he did at the beginning. What about denominations? So we have religion. As I said, we're starting with the big picture. But what about denominations? Isn't there so much more in a denomination than just these two principles? The answer is yes. Denominations are a separate conversation, but you cannot have a denomination conversation until you embrace true religion. And one of the issues that denominations have right now is that they do not embrace this definition prior to trying to have a conversation with one another. Now, if you wanted to be here till 2 a.m. tomorrow morning, we could jump into the denominations. But we're not going to do that tonight. As I said, we're going to keep a big picture mentality for last night, tonight, and tomorrow night. Then we're going to narrow the focus a little more. But denominations are worth looking at because there are hundreds of them and one Bible. So it's worth looking at that because religion is beautiful and simple. Now, as we've said, the Bible has a lot of prescriptions and a lot of pieces of direction that have principles behind it, and it's worthy of our exploration to decide how we're going to live. But it needs to start right here. So I want you to be encouraged, friends. In our secular society in which we live, there's still tremendous need for true religion. True religion. And so I invite you to consider that tonight. Last night, we discovered that we can trust the Bible because the Bible paints a realistic picture of life. Tonight, we discover that we can trust true religion and truly religious people who display that in word and action because true religion is actually a beautiful thing that makes the world a happier place. And it's beautiful because God designed it, James reinforced it, and today you and we can still live it. So I invite you to consider that as we have a friend here tonight who I think is going to play some beautiful music for us. Would you come up and just allow us a few moments to ponder what we've shared tonight as you share this message of music with us? Thank you so much. you so much. That was beautiful. Music. To behold, isn't it? Yes, thank you. Thank you. As Reed comes up, I just wanted to mention once again, if you have any questions, feel free to use a question card. Tomorrow I'm going to do my best to remember, and Reed will remind me as well, that I'm going to put my email up on the screen on the final slide so that if anybody wants to just shoot an email inquiry later and you don't have time to write the question down on the card, you're welcome to do that as well. But for tonight, we have question cards. If you would like to fill anything out, you can ask something related to the presentation tonight or any random question, anything that crosses your mind. It doesn't have to be related to this evening as well. I love to have honest inquiries and have that conversation with you either through phone or in person or email. And so thank you so much. Reed, if you'd like to, any housekeeping items, or I don't know if you're going to have a Wheel of Fortune spin the wheel tonight, or? Okay, right on. Thank you.
Thank you, Pastor James, for another wonderful message. And you know we're going to be back here tomorrow night at 7 p.m. And the title of our message tomorrow night will be, Can We Trust God in the Midst of Suffering? And I'm sure that's something we've all had to endure and face, and we are only here because of God's grace, right? Okay, so we've got the Wheel of Fortune. So let her rip there, Brother Dan. Oh, that's Marlene. Marlene was here last night, but not tonight. So let her rip again. And there we go. Carl. Carl's in the house. He just left. We'll keep that for Carl. He was here tonight. He gets his prize. You got one more, Dan? And Hermina. Hermina's in the house. So here comes your gift. Wonderful. There you go. So that's our message for tonight, our program for tonight, folks. So have a great night, have a great day tomorrow, and we hope and pray to see you all back here tomorrow at 7 p.m. Remember, there's some free literature out there. If you don't have a Bible, you can get it. And as Pastor James said, there is the question box out there. So if you have a question, just put it in the box, and we will answer them tomorrow night. So have a great night, and God bless.